And how are you today?
Hello, doctor. Everything good, doctor. Bless you.
God bless you too.
Good to see you.
Good to see you as well, sir.
Okay, thank you. How long, for class for Zoom?
How long for class soon? How many more sessions or
Oh, more session. More session.
how many more sessions?
Yes.
Well, we can talk. We'll talk tonight. We can talk tonight
Okay. Okay.
at the end of class.
Okay. So in the moment, me finally everything assignment. So you put grades. You put grade in the finally the class.
Yes, I will.
Okay. Okay. Sorry for my English.
No, that's
Okay. 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 So me very happy in the class. Every day student is very important. It's interesting.
yeah.
It's very good.
Well, I'm glad to have you in the class, sir. Very glad to have you.
Okay. Thank you.
How many children do you have?
What do you say?
How many children do you have?
Oh, children. I have two. Two boys.
Good.
Elia, ven acá. I had two boys. This is the hi. I had 2 years and a half. I had 2 years and a half. So the first 7 years.
Okay.
So it's a lot work. Work in my work, in the student, so work in the house.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Oh, very, very handsome boy. Very handsome.
okay, thank you. Okay, bye.
Uh,
So good. So I'm pretende finally one year and a half finally the master. And think my finally the master my English is very good.
well, it will get better. The more you practice, the better it will be.
Exactly, yes.
Yes. Yes.
So you talk Spanish, a little bit Spanish?
A little bit.
Okay. When you studying Spanish?
When did I study?
Yes.
Oh, many years ago.
Okay.
Many years ago. But sometimes I'll watch Spanish television
Oh yes, it's good.
because
Yes.
that's a better way to learn. When you hear people speaking, it becomes easier to learn.
Yeah. So the problem Spanish is uh, I don't know the name in English. Uh, so in English it's I want to eat, you know.
Uh-huh.
So in Spanish it's different. Uh, eat, o sea, comer, right now. So it's a lot time for the verbs,
Yes.
Is
Yes.
it?
Yes. The verbs in English are more difficult to conjugate
Mm-hmm.
because they are very irregular.
Yes.
verbs are irregular. And in English, the adjectives are always before the verb, but that is not, and or before the noun. The adjectives are always before the noun in English, but not always in Spanish.
Exactly, exactly.
So it becomes more difficult. But Spanish is much easier to learn. Spanish is easier than English. It's easier than English.
Yes, that's all right. Okay, doctor.
Yes.
Hi, Dr. Boone.
Good evening. How are you?
Jonathan. I got word from Uber and Daniel. They're not going to be able to make it, but Daniel said his wife is recording for him.
Okay.
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 Hello, Francena.
Jonathan is saying hello to you, Sister Francina.
Hi, Jonathan. You doing okay today?
Good to see you. Bless you.
Bless you as well.
Okay, thank you.
Well, this evening, we're going to go ahead and get started with whoever is here. I want to spend some time perhaps looking at a few issues that we have not considered thus far in terms of risk management, security, and some other kinds of legal issues that church administrators would do well to be apprised of and abreast of. So we'll take a look at a few of those things on this evening. So let's bow our heads for a word of prayer, and perhaps others will join us later. Our Father in heaven, thank you so very much for granting us the opportunity to spend some time together on this evening. And I trust and pray that you please bless us as we embark upon this conversation this evening. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
I want to turn your attention just for a moment. My Bible study app is acting. There we go. To the book of Isaiah, the 62nd chapter, beginning with verse 6. Isaiah, the 62nd chapter, beginning with verse 6. And the reason why this caught my attention is because of what it says and because of what it does not say. It says here in Isaiah chapter 62, verse 6, I have set watchmen upon thy walls, O Jerusalem, which shall never hold their peace day or night. Ye that make mention of the Lord, keep not silence. I have set watchmen on thy walls, O Jerusalem, which shall never hold their peace day nor night. Now, what struck me about that particular verse was this. Usually, watchmen were set upon the walls to warn the people of coming danger. The watchmen upon the wall had a vantage point upon which they could look out and see the enemy coming. And it was their job and it was their responsibility to sound the alarm at the approach of the enemy. And so watchmen were stationed all around the walls of the city, day and night, to alert the people of the coming of the enemy. But here, the watchmen have a unique kind of charge that is given to them. It is a charge that is different than has ever been given to any other watchman in the history of the Bible, and maybe even the history of the world. For he says, I have set watchmen upon thy walls, O Jerusalem, which shall never hold their peace day nor night, right? And then it says this, ye that make mention of the Lord, keep not silent, and give him no rest till he make Jerusalem a praise in the earth. Listen, these watchmen are standing on the walls not to alert the people to the coming of the enemy, but to alert the people to the coming of the Lord. Isn't that beautiful, right? They're not standing there waiting for the enemy to come, trembling and say, oh, here comes the enemy. But instead, they're saying, here comes the Lord. Now, in the times in which we live, as watchmen who are set upon the walls of Jerusalem, we have an awesome opportunity and an awesome responsibility. Our responsibility is surely to alarm the people as to the coming of the enemy. We can see that the devil is loose in the land. We see the rise of spiritualism, the rise of demonic activity, the rise of political unrest. We see the rise of sin and iniquity. We see all of these things transpiring. We see the church turning in itself and on itself. And yes, we are to sound the alarm at those things. But we have another responsibility that is just as important, equally as important, and that is to sound the alarm that God is coming. Lift up the trumpet and loud let it ring. Jesus is coming again. The watchmen on the walls. We ought to be standing on the walls and say, hey, look, folk, while you're looking at this, you better be looking for the coming of the Lord. For in just a little while, he that shall come will come, and he will not tarry. Jesus is on the way, and it's our responsibility to look for the coming of the Lord and the cloud of glory. So tonight, as watchmen, do your job, call out sin, but also call upon the Savior for deliverance. So let's bow our heads and have some prayer. Jonathan, pray for us. En español, por favor. You're on mute. Unmute yourself.
So the question is, Jesus come again? Come again.
Yes, Jesus come again. I want you to open for us with prayer.
Okay, so pray. Padre bueno que moras en los cielos, una vez más te damos gracias porque eres bueno y porque para siempre es tu misericordia. Señor, queremos rogar en esta hora que puedas bendecir esta clase, que puedas bendecir al doctor Blue, que pueda ser una bendición para nosotros que estamos estudiando. Ayúdanos a crecer cada día juntos, ayúdanos a tener tu bendición, ayúdanos a saber que siempre tú estás ahí para nosotros. Muéstranos el camino por el cual debemos andar y agradecemos que nos has llamado en esta hora para estudiar en esta universidad y podernos preparar para un día no muy lejano, poder trabajar en tu obra y compartir este evangelio a muchas personas que no todavía te han conocido. Señor, nos ponemos en tus manos una vez más y te rogamos que tu bendición pueda estar con nosotros desde ahora y por siempre. Lo rogamos in the name of Jesus pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, sir. I
appreciate
it. Appreciate that.
I have a text from Joy that says she should be about 10 minutes.
Okay. All right. That's fine. That is fine. So did you survive the hurricane down there, Sister Francina?
Yes, we did. Amazing God, we only got a little wind and a little rain. Not a lot at all.
Oh, praise
God. Still sour for Lake Charles, though.
Yeah, I know. They've had a rough season this year. Very, very rough.
One lady said that there might not be anything to go back to. Might not be a Lake Charles after this. So,
wow. You know what I think is a shame? I think it really is a shame that we often don't get all of the news in different parts of the country. So it's almost like what I have discovered is that if it's not affecting me, then it's not important. That's basically how people see it and how people feel. You know, if it's not affecting me, then it must not be that important. When COVID was happening in New York, it was hard, very, very hard for me to make my friends in other parts of the country understand how terrible this is and what the implications of this was, you know?
Right.
And that we really, truly need to pray for one another. And I remember one friend who lived in Alabama. She said, "Well, you know, I'm not scared of COVID because God just protects me, and y'all do what you have to do up there, but I'm not scared of it." And now, when I talk to her on the phone, she said, "I ain't going out. I'm not going out for anything in the world," because now she sees it. It's like wildfires don't mean anything to people who live in the swamps of Florida, right? And hurricanes don't mean anything to people who live on the West Coast. But you know, in times like this, we really do need to continually pray for each other and ask God's blessing upon each other. So I'm glad that you survived, and pray that you will continue to bless during this season, and also ask that God will bless those others who went through these terrible storms.
Amen.
Tonight, I want us to spend more time talking this evening, so I kind of hope that one or two of the others will actually come on so we can actually engage in some conversation around some of these issues that I'm going to be raising this evening, because I think it is important for us sometimes to think through some of these things. So I want to start the discussion by talking about the physical plant and risk management. And at first, it doesn't seem like it's an interesting kind of topic. We talk about risk management, but I assure you, risk management is tremendously important. And oftentimes, risk management is one of the more important things that a church administrator is going to have to deal with. It will certainly be one of the more challenging things that you have to deal with. It will be things that will often stretch you and strain you when you're dealing with issues of legality and risk and how to mitigate those risks. Right? So tonight we want to talk about safety, and we're going to talk about safety in terms of many different things. We'll talk about first of all just the safety of the facility itself, but then we want to talk about the safety of the people, and how do you keep your people safe, and what are some of the threats that current church administrators have to grapple with in terms of protecting and providing safety for their people. So safety, first of all, is the condition of being protected from or unlikely to cause danger, risk, or injury. So it's the condition of being protected from something, right? Or it's the condition of being unlikely to cause danger, right? So one is active, being protected from, right? That is the proactive status. And unlikely to cause danger, right? That is the reactive stance. So in other words, what you do is you create the situation so that danger doesn't have to come, or risk doesn't have to come, right? It is the responsibility of the church administrator to create an environment of safety. That's your responsibility, by the minimization of risk, number one, and number two, the implementation of policies, procedures, and practices to promote safety. So you gotta minimize risk and then promote safety. And you do that through the actions that you take and the actions that your board takes. In the Seventh-day Adventist Church, there is an organization that helps us. And anybody who has served on a board before, or on the church board, you probably know about Adventist Risk Management, something about them, a little bit about what they do. But most people don't understand the extent of what the Adventist Risk Management does. So I'd like to just explain it to you quickly before we go on to take a look at a few challenging situations. Adventist Risk Management is the official insurance and risk management company for the Seventh-day Adventist Church and Adventist ministries worldwide. We provide, they say, timely, real-world insurance products and innovative risk management solutions for minimizing risk within Adventist ministries at all levels. We recommend best practices to eliminate oversights that can lead to costly accidents. So their job is to help us stay out of trouble, to find any ways that they can to help us to minimize risk and to mitigate against losses so that it costs us less money. And to let you know, the extent of their operation is quite large. The Adventist Church does two things with risk management. One is that it has direct insurance. The other thing that it has co-insurance and reinsurance. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. Their mission. Our mission is to protect the ministries of the Seventh-day Adventist World Church. We don't view what we do as just business. Our ministry is to protect your ministry. You know, oftentimes, if you've ever sat on the church board, you've heard people complain about the amount of the premiums that are paid to Adventist Risk Management. Why do we have to pay all of this money in order to have insurance? They often will say, can't we just go to a local little company and get this done? They can do it cheaper. And I always advise people, don't do it, don't try it. It's going to end up costing you more in the end. You need somebody working for you whose sole interest is to protect you, to protect your organization, to protect the church, who understands uniquely and specifically how you operate ministry. What are the risks that you have, that you're exposed to? Because I guarantee you, our risks may be different from that of a Catholic church or a Methodist church. We have some unique terminologies, like, for example, in the Adventist church, we have little nomenclatures like AY and AYS and JAY. People outside don't know what that is, but everybody in the church knows what AY is, JAY, you know, and all these other little acronyms that we have. Well, in terms of crafting an insurance product for you, they have to know what your operations are in order to shield you against that. That's why we have our own insurance company apart from using another insurance company to do that for us. Now, it says with assets of more than $100 million and annual gross written premiums exceeding $95 million, the GenCon Insurance Company of Vermont is a vital risk management entity for the Seventh-day Adventist Church, insuring against a multitude of liabilities, risks for denominational organizations worldwide. Now, I got a question for you, right? The question is, first of all, do you think that $100 million is a lot of money? Is $100 million a lot?
Everything that's going on in this world.
Huh?
And now we're dealing with everything that's happening and that could happen within a church. Because you can get sued for that amount.
Yeah, $100 million.
By one or two people.
Yeah, $100 million is nothing. $100 million is chunk change, right? Right? So they have $100 million in annual gross written premiums, you know, assets of more than $100 million, and annual gross premiums exceeding $95 million. That's nothing, right? As a matter of fact, there was a case that was settled in one conference, and that one case cost $1 million. That one case was $1 million case. There are some other cases that have gone up actually into the millions of dollars. So while $100 million seems like a lot of money, it's not a lot of money. So the question is, then how is the church able to insure all of these worldwide entities that are worth billions of dollars if all they have is $100 million in annual gross premiums? How are they able to do that? Well, they're able to do that because of something that's called reinsurance. So we insure and then we reinsure. That means that GenCon also buys insurance from other insurance providers. So, for example, we know that at a local church is covered for $1 million liability. And then there's an umbrella over top of that for up to $5 million. Once it goes over $5 million, then the reinsurance kicks in. That means that there's an external company that is out there that now picks up that risk. And that risk is filtered from GenCon, right? GenCon files the claim to the other insurance company who now pays GenCon. But we are still managing our risk because we know the best way to handle our people and do it at the most cost-effective way. The other thing, too, is that because Gen Con Insurance Company, and because we have literally billions of dollars worth of assets, then it's easier for a entity to negotiate on behalf of the World Church the best insurance rates to get. So we can get better insurance rates by working cooperatively than we can by doing it independently. So I know a local church who said, I'm not going to use Gen Con. We're going to go out and get our own insurance. So they got a local agent to write them an insurance policy. The insurance policy covered liability, but then their boiler blew up and they didn't know what to do. They go to the insurance company and say, well, we're not covering that. But when you pay your premiums through your local conference, it covers your property and your liability insurance. It covers you against risk and accidents. There are three actually Gen Con insurance companies, right? One is the Global Umbrella Company. Then there's Gen Con Insurance of Vermont, which is Gibraltar-based captive insurance that provides policies for our organizations in Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Why? Because the laws and the insurance works differently in different parts of the world. So we have companies set up simply to handle them. And then we have another insurance company that handles for us our entities in South America. Here are the things that Gen Con covers for us. General liability, that means when someone sues you because of some negligence, your property. Short-term travel, anytime that you go on a mission trip or you have somebody who's going on a short-term mission trip, do not send them out without getting an insurance policy. All you have to do is call the conference or call Gen Con directly. Let them know that you want short-term mission travel insurance, and they will issue that short-term mission travel insurance for a very, very low, reasonable rate. I, for 10 years, was taking people back and forth to Africa, and I think the insurance that I paid for each one of my people was only like about $13, $14 per person or something. It was something very, very low, because we do this all the time when we take people out and they travel around the world. Volunteer labor, your volunteers are generally covered under your policy already, because everybody in the church is volunteers, right? However, if you are working a specific project that is off-site outside of your church, and there is some risk that's involved with that, then it's always better to get a whole separate policy just to cover you for that event. So let's say you decide you're going to go out into your community and you're going to put roofs on houses for senior citizens. Well, yeah, you are kind of covered, but just to make sure, you want to make sure that your volunteers are covered, especially if your volunteers are not members of the church. If they're not members of the church and they're participating, then get that additional volunteer coverage for you. Activities, accidents, which occur all the time. Ocean, marine, if you're operating a boat. Householders, personal property. So it is possible this works quite well, particularly for those in the mission field. They can insure their property. The pathfinders, every time that the pathfinders go out on a camporee, right? Every time they go out, there needs to be a vote on the board that the pathfinders have gone out. Do you know why?
That's what I was going to ask you. If the board votes that it's okay for them to go, they're covered under the insurance. If anything happens to any of them?
That's right. If anything happens to any of the pathfinders, then it becomes critical that there be a vote. So anytime that you are taking anybody on a trip, make sure you just vote it by the board. Because if there's an accident that happens along the way, the insurance company wants to know, was this an official trip of the church? Did the church know about it? Did the church vote this? So get the votes before the trips. You don't have to get a separate policy for your pathfinders. They are already covered, except perhaps if they're traveling to go to a major camporee or something like that, or sometimes pathfinders have these international camporees where you want to get a separate insurance policy for that. But if your pathfinders are going out, get a policy. And you should also check with your local conference to see what they recommend for your your pathfinders. Keep in mind that some pathfinders' activities are benign, others carry more risk. For example, if you take pathfinders out and they're camping at a lake, they've got to build a campfire. So they're using hatchets and knives and fire and those kinds of things. Then you have greatly increased your risk. So I would check with the pathfinder legal for the conference and also the insurance provider to make sure that I'm sufficiently covered for my pathfinders. The worst thing in the world that can happen is to take the kid out and something happens to the kid, and then to find out that that the coverage is shaky because you didn't take the time to prepare ahead of time for that event. Gen Con Insurance will also cover your personal effects and baggage when you're going. They cover our camps, international SOS, whatever that is. I don't know what that is. Executive risk protection. Now, executive risk protection is there to protect your conference officials and other officials who are acting on behalf of the church. If they're acting on behalf of the church, then they are protected at some level against personal liability. However, if they violate the law and act outside of policy in some sort of way, then that executive risk protection could not be enforced for them, because you're never covered if you act outside of the law, right? If you violate the law, then insurance will not cover you. And then, of course, out of country. Just to show you how these two work together. I don't know if you remember, it must have been maybe about 8, 9, 10 years ago. I believe it was Kentucky Tennessee Conference. They had several of their officers, all their officers were on a plane flying someplace together in a small aircraft. The aircraft crashed, and they ended up losing the president, the secretary, the treasurer, and a couple more departmental people, all in one plane crash. Since that time, the church has taken steps to prevent that from happening again, because after all, you have to manage your risk. So now there's a new policy, and that new policy is that when the executive officers fly, right, they don't fly in the same aircraft. They just don't. They don't travel together, because your organization cannot afford that kind of loss to lose all of your executive officers at one time. So they take different flights. They fly at different times on different aircraft, right? And there's additional protections for them in the event that there be an accident. The same is true flying overseas and out of country. So if they have to travel, for example, I took a trip to South Africa when I was on the General Conference Committee for a conference over there, and there were different people flying in for 2 or 3 days because they were coming in on different flights rather than all on the same flight. So, welcome, Joy. I saw you came in. I just checked and saw you here, so welcome to you. Each church is required by its overseeing conference to carry property and liability insurance. And those of us, we all pretty much know what the difference is. Property covers your building, its contents from financial loss due to fire, acts of God, that's what they call it, like a storm, like a hurricane, theft, right? Liability insurance protects the church from financial loss due to the actions arising from the operation of or the negligence of its employees, personnel, officers, volunteers, the operation of its plant, equipment, matters arising from its events and programs. So that's what I want to talk about tonight. I want to talk a little bit about property, but I want to talk a whole lot tonight about liability and about safety issues inside the church and some of the things that we all need to be aware of as church administrators, right? So liability is real important, right? Because most of the time, you don't get sued because your building had a problem. You get sued because you didn't do what you were supposed to do. Somebody didn't take care of something that they should have taken care of, or somebody did something that made somebody mad, and therefore the person sues. And at one time, I was in a church, and I was talking to the conference official, and I didn't even know this, right? Because they didn't have to inform me, but they were actively $4 million worth of lawsuits. That had arisen coming out of my church, $4 million worth of lawsuits, right? And it had nothing to do, by the way, with what had transpired in the building or a claim against me, but something else that had happened at the campground, something else that had happened on another conference-sponsored event, but members of my church had sued the conference, right? And I'll talk about one of those claims in a few, right? So all churches are covered by adverse risk management. And I'll tell you this too. Now, you're covered whether you pay the claim, whether you pay the premium or not. And the reason why you're covered, whether you pay the premium or not, is because of the church structure, right? Now, we talked a little bit before about our church structure. And in our church structure, the local church is not a separate entity. The controlling entity, the corporate entity, is who? Who owns your church?
The conference, the general conference.
The conference, right? The conference owns your church, and because the conference owns your church, then the conference must keep insurance on that church. They have to, right? They have to for a number of reasons. Number one, they can't avoid the risk of it not being insured. The second thing is that oftentimes the conference would have collateralized your building in order to finance something else in the conference. So we said a little bit earlier in the class that your church is probably collateralized so that somebody else could buy a church. So when Church Bethel, Big Bethel says, we want to buy a building, the conference says, okay, you have to go through us. So the conference now goes to the bank with Big Bethel Church and says, listen, we want $4 million for Big Bethel to build a church. Well, the bank is not asking Big Bethel for its financial records. The conference is asking, the bank is asking the conference for the financial records. And so all of the assets of the conference are placed up against that loan. So the conference must maintain insurance on these properties, because if one falls, it's like a domino. They all begin to fall. So whether you pay the premium or not, you're covered. But the conference wants you to pay the premium, because where else are they going to get the money from? They have to get the money from the people who are being insured. So they send the bill to the church, and they ask you to pay your premium on time so that they can pay Gen Con on time so that everybody can be protected. So here's what risk management does. They assess the building and the building value. I will say this to everybody who has a building, right? Let them assess the value of the building. But if you think that they have under-assessed the value of your building, then you would be wise to get another independent assessment of your building value. Right? Get another assessment. It may cost you a few $100s, but that's okay. I had a building, general conference came in, risk management came in and said your building is worth $1.8 million. And I knew that wasn't true, because the house that was next door to the church was worth $1 million, right? The church was worth way more than that. Got an independent assessor. Get an independent assessor. The independent assessor came in and says, no, your building is worth $4 million. So now the building is insured for $4 million, not 1.2 or 1.4, whatever it was. Right? They also assess the risk of the claim. Now here is a dirty little secret, and this is horrible, but it's true. The dirty little secret is that your zip code also determines how much you pay. If you are in a high crime area, then your insurance could be a little higher than if you're in a low claim area. So those of us in New York are going to pay more than somebody who is in Oklahoma. because the risks are higher. Right? So they will look at your building, they'll look at your location, they'll also look at the size. That should be the size of, not the size of the location, should be the size of the congregation. And then your premiums are sent to you as a cost per member. So the easiest way for them to break it up is to say, well, listen, okay, now you have 200 members, right, at $65 per member. This is your cost for the year. So that's usually how it breaks down and comes to you. The other thing that we're talking about safety here, we mentioned just quickly code compliance. All municipalities use the National Fire Protection Association Life Safety Code, which mandates the type of exits, the number of exits. However, you better be aware of this. Every municipality will determine what is called the Certificate of Occupancy and building standards. So you're gonna have to meet the basic fire safety codes, but in your town or your city, there may be additional things that you must do in order to operate. You better know what they are. Some places require you to have sprinkler systems, some don't. Some places require you to have fire-rated drywall, some don't. Some will require that if you go up so many stories that you have to have a steel staircase that will not burn to allow people to get up and down the building. And some municipalities don't require that. So know what your municipality requires in terms of building standards. Oftentimes, if your building is older, they will grandfather in your lack of compliance. So they'll say, well, this is an old building, we understand it's been used as a church for the last 50 years. But if you renovate the building, and you renovate the building more than 20% of the actual building itself, they will make you bring the entire building up to building code, to the current codes, which could cost you, tens of thousands of dollars. So know what your town requires. And one more thing about this: do not begin your renovations of your facility without knowing this, because they can come in, inspect, and make you rip it all out and start all over again from the beginning. I've seen them do that. Go in, say, where's your permit? Where's your building permit? Well, we were just doing, no. Did you have a licensed electrician to do this? I want to see his permit, If you don't have that, they can make you rip it all out. So it's okay to get the church guys to do some simple things, but major renovations, get a licensed contractor and get your building permits in advance, right? Now, I want to talk a little bit about the other part of risk management, which is the liability. And here is where we're going to begin some of our conversation, okay? Your liability covers you against negligence and against your actions that place the church at risk and cause injury or harm to somebody else. You are required to deal with that, okay? So there has been a tradition in this country to protect what's called the priest-penitent relationship. So that basically says, if I go to a priest or if I go to a minister, then I can expect that if I tell that minister something in secret, that that's just between he and I, or she and I, and therefore that conversation is protected. It's confidential. You have often seen, perhaps in the movies, where they call the priest to come in, and the priest says, well, I cannot say what was said to me in confession, right? Because it's generally expected that if I'm confessing my sins to my priest or to my clergyman, they will hold that, right? Just like with a doctor-patient, that conversation is protected. The other day when Donald Trump was in the hospital and they were asking his doctor in the news what his condition was, the doctor said, I can't really tell you because of patient physician confidentiality. So we have the same thing as clergy, right? Even, here's the stigma, right? Even if the confessor, the person who's telling you the stuff, even if that person is a danger to himself or to others. Now, that word danger to self or others is the standard by which intervention is usually mandated or required or strongly urged. If you see that somebody is a danger to themselves or someone else, then it's expected that you will call the police or call the authorities. But if you're a clergy person, right, and someone confesses something to you, you don't even have to report it, even if the person is a danger to themselves or to somebody else. Did you know that? You don't have to report it. Right? But should you report it? That's my question. Let's say I had a situation one night. A woman came into my office, right, and she had a knife, right. And so she comes in with the knife, and she says, I need to talk to you. I need to talk to you. I said, well, come on, man. She said, I have this knife. I said, yeah. She said, can you hold it for me? I said, hold this knife. Why don't I hold this knife for you? Because I just got into a fight with somebody, and I cut her, and I don't want to be picked up on the street holding a knife. And this is a church, and you a pastor, right? You should hold a knife for me, because I'm confessing to you. What do you think about that? Should I hold the knife? Should I keep the secret? Should I report it? Should I not report it? Obviously, she's a danger to somebody else. Should I report it or not report it? I have the right not to report it. But what is my moral and ethical obligation?
Seventh-day Adventist pastors.
Can you speak just a little bit louder?
Yeah, Seventh-day Adventist pastors, they're not priests. We don't do the whole confessional thing, so I wouldn't think that people shouldn't be expecting it's going to be like if they went into a confessional booth. I guess I'm saying, yeah, I would report it. I mean, she had no reason to think that I wouldn't, and she should have clarified that before telling me.
Okay. All right. So you think we should report it then? You would report it.
Well, I don't know if I will. I'm just saying I think you could. I mean, there's a strong argument for reporting it.
Okay. There's a strong argument for reporting. Is there a strong argument for not reporting it?
No.
I think my opinion would be I wouldn't report it, but I wouldn't take the knife either. And I would let her know that she needs to go and turn herself in order to avoid maybe the idea of running away, especially if it was something that was beyond her control. Maybe the other person jumped on her or whatever. The whole point is she needs to go and do something about it. I would return her in and no, I won't take your knife. That would be my thoughts on it.
That would be your thoughts on it, okay. Well, I say two things. First of all, that even though we're not Catholic priests, we are afforded the same privilege as a priest. In other words, what transpires between a pastor and their parishioner is considered to be sacrosanct, not necessarily in the Constitution, but in case law and in precedent. However, in a situation like this, when a person is clearly in danger to someone else, then I think that the moral obligation is to say to that person, well, look, you have an opportunity here, right? Your opportunity is that you can turn yourself in, right? Or I'm going to pick up and I'm going to report this incident that has transpired. As much as I don't want to hurt you, but it appears as though that you've hurt somebody else, and you need to get some help right now. How can I help you? Oftentimes I will say to people in advance, You know, I'm court mandated to report certain things. When I also have a moral, ethical. So listen, if you don't want me to know it, then don't tell me, right? But if I think that you are in danger to yourself or to someone else, I'm going to pick up the phone. It's like if someone, I got a phone call, was it yesterday? One of the members said to me, she said, I got somebody who wants to call you. He's suicidal, but he doesn't want to get help. Well, you know, I would tell him when he calls me, like I've told others, that if you pick up the phone and you call me and you're suicidal, and I assess if you really are suicidal based upon the criteria that we use to assess that, then I'm going to pick up the phone. I'm going to get as much information as I can, and I'm going to make sure that I send EMS over to your house. Because at that point, if you really are a danger to yourself, I don't want to go to sleep that night knowing that you have killed yourself and I could have stopped it. But I would usually let people know in advance. Listen, this is serious enough. And if you don't want me to know, don't tell me. But if you tell me and I think that you're really in danger to yourself, I'm going to act. And that way I'm not violating their confidentiality because I will let them know in advance. And at the same time, I'm doing the moral and ethical thing. There is one notable, however, mandated exception, right? And that mandated exception, right, is that all clergy are mandated to report child abuse. Child abuse, you don't have the option. If a child is being abused, physically, emotionally, sexually, negligence, and you know about it, you're required to report that. And why do you think that is? Why do you think that that exception exists for child abuse? Why does it exist for? Why do we give kids that sort of special consideration and not adults?
I think
Because they have no one to speak for them and to help them.
Right.
yes.
In most cases. Because if they did, I don't think they would be coming to us.
There's no one to speak for them, right? And I do think that it has been somewhat of a shame and a crime over these last few years to see what has transpired in the Catholic Church when there have been so many cases of child sexual abuse, and the people who were perpetrating the sexual abuse on the children were the ones who should have been their protectors. And so some have hidden behind this notion of I'm a clergy, therefore I can't reveal certain things. And in the process of them hiding behind it, they've used that as a shield to commit crimes against children. So if a child is suspected of being abused, then that is mandated reporting. Here's a situation that came to me, and I'll share this with you. Real life situation. A 16-year-old female comes to church on Sabbath afternoon, and she tells me, which is what she tells you, that she's afraid to go home because her mother hits her and makes her take care of her 3 younger siblings. The mother is a member of the church and appears to be a respectable person, albeit sometimes stressed as a single parent. You are aware that you are, it should be you are aware, should be aware, excuse me, you are aware that you are court mandated to report child abuse. What do you do? What do you do? Tell me what steps that you would take in a situation like this. You got this 16-year-old in front of you who says, man, I don't want to go home because my mama going to hit me because I am not taking care of my brothers and sisters. You know the mother because she comes to church every week. She appears to be a little stressed out because she's single, right? And now this 16-year-old who's still a minor has reported to you, right, that she feels abused and is afraid to go home. What do you do?
Would you approach the parent first, the mother?
Well, don't ask me. Tell me what you would do.
I think I would approach her. I mean, I don't want to get the authorities involved first. Find out, we can help her without getting, you know, the government involved. Sometimes it may help. I don't know. I don't know how bad, to to what extent she's abusive with her children.
Hmm. Anybody else?
Um, Looking at the part that says she's afraid to go home. Um, if I mean, I would talk to her and ask like a few questions, clarifying, what she means that she's afraid to go home. Like, is she afraid that she's not safe at home? You know, physically unsafe? To try to get at that a little more. But if she's really saying I'm afraid to go home because it's, so serious, whatever the hitting, I think you do have to report first. Because if it is legitimate, and you tell the parent before you report, and then the parent takes it out on the child, and then later it's revealed that that's what you did, then you would have kind of endangered the child further. So that's a sticky one. But with a 16-year-old especially, they should be able to articulate to you in more detail about how they're feeling unsafe at home, as opposed to a 4-year-old or something. So hopefully by talking to her, you could kind of figure out if this is legitimate or if she's just feeling frustrated in the moment.
Do 16-year-olds sometimes lie?
Oh, definitely. But I mean, unless you can tell, then you would have to err on the side of caution.
But you have a lie detector, right?
I think, Dr. Blue, if she has been mistreated by her mom, I think some signs would be showing prior to her coming to the pastor. I think somebody has to notice her behavior, because when kids are abused, they behave completely different than we're not. So, I mean, I understand what Joyce says, and you say that they lie, but if there's a certain behavior on her that is giving a sign that something's wrong with her, maybe she wants to be by herself all the time. She doesn't want to be with friends. She doesn't want to get involved in church activities. That could be a sign that she's telling the truth, that is not a lie.
So what if she is not showing any signs? Is it possible for someone to be abused and to appear to be a smiling, happy, well-adjusted child and is still being abused?
You gotta be a really strong young lady to not show signs of abuse, because it's hard. I've seen it with my own eyes. That's why I'm saying I know that at that age, you act different when you're being abused.
Well, it is possible. I'll just tell you this, right? It is possible for someone to appear to be quite well adjusted and to have learned how to hide the abuse, to have learned how to mask it quite well for the sake of survival. Because if they reveal it, then it only perpetuates more abuse. So they end up protecting. There's all kinds of ways that sometimes the abuse victim will believe that they deserve the abuse. Sometimes the abuse victim will subjugate themselves to the abuse and actually love the abuser and not want to see the abuser in trouble. So there's all kinds of ways that abuse could mask itself. So one of the reasons why the court mandates the reporting is that oftentimes a lot of pastors were trying to make the determination based upon their unskilled observations. Now, everybody who's on this line right now has a bachelor's and you're working on a master's degree. They're educated people. You have had a life before, you have life experience. But I can tell you the majority of the pastors who are out there practicing ministry right now do not have a bachelor's degree. The Adventist church tends to be an educated church, where in many lesser denominations you don't have educated clergy. You don't have to be an educated person to be a Baptist pastor. You don't necessarily have to be an educated person to be a Pentecostal pastor, or independent denomination, or an independent church pastor, or in some sort of independent denomination. Then that's not required, and so it is required of us, therefore, to make the report. However, earlier Francina said something when we were talking about abuse, of what she may do. And I can tell you what I did in this situation. I'm not saying it's right. It is what I did. I did talk to this girl independently. I called her mother, and I told her mother I would like to see her immediately at church. The mother came to the church. I sat down and I had the mother in a separate room from the daughter. And I shared with her what the daughter had shared with me. And I said to her, it is obvious that whether abuse has gone on or not, that's not my call. I cannot assess whether or not abuse has transpired because I wasn't there. But what I can say to you is that the relationship with you and your daughter are in deep trouble. Is in deep trouble right now. And for whatever reason, she doesn't feel safe. Therefore, it is imperative that you get help. And there are mechanisms that are set up to get you that help. Therefore, I'm sitting here with you right now, and let's make this call together so that the authorities will know that you are cooperating in getting the help, rather than it's an antagonistic situation where someone has to come in and force you to get the help. But if you cannot make the phone call, then I will make it because I have no other choice. And that's the way I handled it. She was cooperative, and we were able to call together and set something up. I actually had some other people in my church who actually happened to be child protective workers. And so they were able to work along with her and navigate her through the system successfully, so that they got the counseling that they needed. They didn't take the children out of home. But we should be well aware of the fact that being people of color, that they treat us differently than what they treat white kids. White kid complains, they go in, they say, oh, can't we get you some help? A black kid or a Hispanic kid claims abuse, they want to come in and snatch the kids out, put them in foster care, make people jump through 100 hoops. So sometimes we get treated not the same way, and oftentimes don't get the same resources, which makes us a little reticent to engage in the system, because sometimes we see the inequities in the system. However, we have to do what we have to do to protect the child, okay? And not take upon ourselves undue responsibility. Now, I'll say this. It says that you must report. It doesn't say how soon you have to report. It doesn't say how much you have to report. It just says that you have to report. If you are able to ameliorate the situation and put it in some sort of balance, right, before the reporting, that's fine. You can still report and say, listen, they were having some difficulties. I'm just letting you know that I have been working along with this family, and A, B, C, D, E, F, G, they're here, and you would do well to learn the language of the system and do well to learn the language of abuse, so that you can communicate effectively with those who will be intervening. So that when you can talk to them in the language that they understand, they see you now as a partner in the process and not as an adversary to the process, and that helps. Plenty of times I've gone to court with members, and I've been able to stand up in court with the family, with the mother or the father, and say to the judge, they're members of my church. We have been working along with them. We've been working cooperatively with the social workers, and we feel that this person has the proper social safety net around them. That there are support systems that we have in place to, and they say, okay, all right, Pastor, we understand what you're saying. All right, we'll work along with you. But understand, it's your obligation. If you do not report and something happens to that child and you knew about it, you're in trouble.
Yes.
Right? So report. Difficult. I want to play you this little video because we're talking about liability. Play video. I want you to listen carefully to this. This is a real case. The woman in blue is an attorney. The man on the other side is an attorney. And play. Oh, come on. Why won't it play? All right, let me just do this. Let me end this show. See if I can go here.
Pastor Blue?
Yes.
Maybe up at the top where it says enable content. That yellow banner.
Down a little bit.
Down, that little yellow banner at the top of your screen where it says security warning. References to external media objects have been blocked.
Let's see.
It's down.
Go down a little bit. Enable content.
Down.
Up.
Oh, I see it right there.
Right there.
Okay. All right. See, that's what I'm talking about, man. It's so nice to have people who are a little bit younger around to help old men out. Let's see it. All right.
Another big story at 5 lawsuits filed against a former pastor and the Florida 7th. Another big story at 5 lawsuits filed against a former pastor and the Florida.
Oh, stop it. Sorry about that. Sorry.
Oops.
Now, let me go back again.
Right there.
Another big story at 5 lawsuits filed against a former pastor and the Florida Seventh-day Adventists.
Attorneys for 2 women who claim they were sexually abused by a pastor say the church was negligent. Pastor Billy LeVay was sentenced to 7 years in jail last year. A judge found him guilty of sexual activity with a minor and child abuse. News 6's Nadine Yanis was at the press conference today. She's alive at the church off Rio Grande in Orange County. So, Nadine, both women had some very powerful messages today.
Well, Matt, they wanted to tell their stories of what they say happened within these church doors behind me here when they were both elected into coveted secretarial roles here to the pastor back in 2016. And they say that within the Haitian community and Haitian churches, the church is like a second family and the pastor is like a second father, which is why they stayed silent until they announced this lawsuit today.
Billy sang my mother's funeral. And my father, in his head, he's saying he would never do anything to my girl.
Kenya Gills was just 16 years old, and her father was the right-hand man to the pastor of the Bethel Seventh-day Adventist Church, Billy LeVay, now sentenced to 7 years of probation for sexually assaulting her from June of 2016 until March of 2017.
I was hurting in silence, but it hurt even more when things came out because of my father. I had to look my father in the eyes, and he had to ask me, why did you not tell me I am all that you have?
The abuse coming out after a video leaked showing the former pastor having sexual relations with Kenya, who was a minor, and with the other secretary of the church, Jenny Dorsonville, who was 21 at the time.
I remember when the first abuse happened to me, I was confused. He even said it to me too before I left. He was just like, your poor mind, you don't even know what's happening to you. And you probably won't even grasp it, but eventually you'll come around.
Not pressing criminal charges back then, but here with Kenya to file a lawsuit today against both Billy LeVay and the Florida Seventh-day Adventists, claiming negligence.
We're looking for them to instill policies that have grip and teeth to make sure
that women, both of age and not of age, like these two beautiful women here that are very brave to tell their story, don't have to go through what these young women have gone through. And today we went by that former pastor's house. He was not home. We've contacted his attorney late this afternoon. We have not heard back. We also reached out to the Florida Seventh-day Adventists. We've also had no response. We'll see if we hear back from them, Matt, next time you see me at 6 o'clock. Until then, we're live in Orange County. I'm Nadine Yanis, getting Results News 6.
Wow. So, what do you think about that one?
Kind of breaks my heart watching this.
Yeah, it is rather unfortunate, but it is still nevertheless true that the church can become a place where abuse can transpire, and it goes on unnoticed because people don't expect for it to happen there in that location. And yet, anytime you have a place where people can be in close proximity like that, you have the opportunity for abuse. Someone asked me the question one time, how could this stuff take place inside the church? Well, I said, well, the church is no different from any other organization. You have people who are coming together, and people don't stop being people just because they're in the church. You know, hopefully people are transformed by the love of Christ, and the love of Christ constrains them from doing certain things. But there's no guarantee that simply because it's inside the church that things won't happen. And you notice here that it said they were church secretaries. They were elected church secretaries. So what position did they have? So they were elected as church secretaries. That means they had the position of what? Do you know what that is? They were clerks. They were church clerks, right? Because you don't get elected to be a secretary. You get elected to be a clerk. So these were clerks, and it says to me, therefore, that you have two young women who are elected to be clerk. More than likely, the pastor probably helped to manipulate the election process to ensure that they would become clerks, so that he could have the opportunity to work with them alone and independently. Right. Notice what else is interesting about the story. They said no charges were filed, but now they're coming back with a lawsuit. I'm not sure about Florida law. Maybe you know, Daniel, whether or not charges have to be pressed or not.
If the person is a minor, I believe, like sometimes the woman says, well, I don't want to press any charges, the state will take over. But it has to be 18 years, under 18, a minor. It's different when you're over 18, but if you're under 18, and they say the victim changes her mind, say, well, I don't want to press charges, well, that's too bad, because the state will press charges. Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Joe. You want to say something?
I thought it also said that he was in jail for 7 years, so maybe he'd had criminal charges similar in another case, or there was a reason for them not to pursue it in that one, but I thought they'd said he was...
Well, you know what? They actually said, you know what they actually said? They said he was on probation.
Probation, yeah.
And I'm saying probation for 7 years for sexual abuse of a minor, that seems a little light to me. But here's the challenge, and women can tell you this, that oftentimes in these issues of sexual abuse, it's not just women, it happens to boys as well, that often the victim gets unbelieved. And people always raise the eyebrow and say, well, what did she do? Well, how could she be sleeping with him from March of 2000 or June of 2016 to March of 2017 and not say a word about it? So oftentimes the victim gets blamed. Right? But this creates a nightmare for the church. What are some of the repercussions from a case like this? Well, first of all, the local church, and then the conference. What are some of the nightmares that can be created from this situation?
I think it just gives the church a bad image in overall, and it creates a nightmare for the entire church. I mean, if that would happen in our church, I mean, it would affect everybody.
What would happen to the membership? I mean, would you feel safe in bringing your girls to a church like that where the pastor was a known abuser?
I don't think he would have a job after that. I don't.
He wouldn't have a job, but my question is, would you feel comfortable bringing your daughters to that place?
Yeah.
No.
No.
Then know why? Why, Francine?
I wouldn't, because I wouldn't feel comfortable until I knew that there had been some sort of change going on in the church, and people had an opportunity to speak and examine it all the way through. That would be me.
I think
because he's one person. How many people knew what was going on and didn't say anything?
So you wonder whether or not there was a culture,
right, of doing that
to facilitate.
Right, because my thought were they weren't saying anything because she said they considered him like the father. This happened because maybe they had a Catholic mentality from before, or whatever. But whatever the case is, I'd like more to be done. It seemed like to me something like that should have been picked up on.
Good. All right. So you feel like something was askew there. That somebody should have seen something or known something, and then maybe, just maybe, people had grown to accept this. Maybe give the pastor a little bit more freedom that he needed to have, or overlook certain tendencies that may have been there all along.
Right. Keep in mind, I'm from a culture where Baptist ministers and others do pretty much what they want to do, and they still have membership or members. In that regard, I'm saying one can dump his wife for the girlfriend, or they've known some of the deacons to be fooling around or even die at the other woman's house. They know all this is going on, but they don't do anything about it. So before I would take my child or children into that kind of environment, I would have to be certain that this church is going through a renovation or a renewal or revival or general house cleaning.
Yeah, I agree with Fran. One of the things that she said, that a lot of people are going to be asking this question, and I would too. Like, how many people knew that this was going on? I don't want my children in this church. So you're right, Dr. Boo. That's going to affect the membership. A lot of people will probably just go to another church because of that. It's going to create a matter of trust now. Yeah.
That's why, as an administrator, when something like this happens, the administrator has to move quickly and decisively. So it's almost like this is not time to say, well, let's sit around and talk about what happened. No. You have to be very, very clear that you are sending the signal to everybody that this behavior is absolutely unacceptable. It will not be tolerated. And, I would be the one who would go in and say, no, I'm sorry, but I'm prosecuting you. You're going to jail. Yeah. Because you have to send that signal very, very clearly that this is not who you are as an organization. The other thing, too, is that in a situation like this, oftentimes risk management will come in, and there was don't say anything because this is a legal matter and we got to go to court, right? But you know what I would do in a situation like this? Is just me personally. I would ignore risk management. If my church is in the news behind something like that, I'd be the first one out there. I would be helping to shape the story. I would carefully craft my statement, and in my statement, I would say, this does not represent this church. We are appalled and aghast, and we stand with the authorities demanding a full investigation, and that this individual, if found guilty, will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, because you've got to send that signal to the members as well as to the community, because this hurts evangelism. Who's going to join this church from now on? Every time they walk past the church, they say, well, that's the church where, the pastor was fooling around with the little girls up in there. They're not going to come to that church, right? Not only that, but your insurance premiums are about to go up through the roof. Right. your insurance premium is going to go up through the roof, right? So you got to take quick action and decisive action in a situation like that. There can be no safe harbor, right, for the abuse of a minor, right, or for someone misusing their position of authority for sexual favor. And by the way, you should know that the definition of sexual abuse is oftentimes when a person it is always sexual abuse when a person has authority over another person. It's always sexual abuse. Even if it was consensual, it is still considered to be sexual abuse because the authority over another person gives an unequal advantage to the person who is in the sexual relationship. So if a pastor was having a relationship with somebody outside of his church, right, then it might not be considered sexual abuse, except if he were acting in the authority as a pastor. If he was acting as a pastor, using his pastoral privilege, it would be definitely considered sexual abuse and not a consensual relationship. So even with the one who was 21 years old, who was old enough to consent, because he was a pastor and had authority over her, it is sexual abuse. That clear as mud?
Yep.
All right. Here's another situation for you. And then we're going to get into some other things. We're going to come down to a church member trips and falls on an uneven tile in the basement, breaking her arm in the process. What do you do? Right?
Call your insurance company.
Huh?
Call your insurance company after you call an ambulance for her.
All right. You call an ambulance for her, right? I'm glad you said that. Because here's something that every church needs to be aware of as well, right? Even if you have doctors and nurses and technicians in your congregation who might be able to immediately intervene in an emergency situation, it is not their responsibility to provide hospital type of care or to give an assessment on the spot and say to that person, go home. If a person passes out at your church, you might have a doctor or nurse there say, oh, just drink some water, you were a little lightheaded. You could say that. But what if that person had a cerebral hemorrhage and they passed out because of that? What if the person had a heart attack and they passed out because their heart temporarily stopped? You don't know what the situation is. So whenever you have a medical emergency at your church, the first thing you do is you get that person proper medical attention. You make sure that they get to the hospital, either by ambulance or someone takes them to the hospital to get an assessment, a medical assessment. And if they refuse to go to the hospital to get a medical assessment, you make them sign a waiver to say that you sought to get the medical treatment and they chose not to do that. Now, that would imply, by the way, that you have such documents on hand, right? That if a person refuses, that they ought to be able to sign that they are refusing medical assessment, right? After that, the very next thing that you do is, you're absolutely right, you make sure you get your incident report. In your incident reports, you want to make sure you have your witnesses who are around, get the person's statement, whatever else, and you make sure you call your conference risk manager immediately to let them know what happened with all the contact information, and they will begin to follow up from there. So the person went to the doctor, right? And they talked to Adventist Risk Management. And Adventist Risk Management tells her that they will reimburse her for all justified and receipted paid bills, right? Yay, she don't have to pay, right? She's gonna be reimbursed. However, she's reluctant to go for follow-up because she can't afford to pay out of pocket. What do you do? What's the next thing, right? What should you do with that? You know? advise her to borrow the money, get the treatment, and then wait for the reimbursement? Would you advise her to go back to the company and demand payment? Would you advise her to get an injury and liability attorney? What would you advise her to do?
I would talk directly to risk management first to see why. Well, they probably can't do any kind of direct billing because she's not on the policy, but to see if Venice Risk Management can reimburse the church directly if the church upfronted the cost. I certainly wouldn't want to tell her to borrow or to get an attorney and sue us.
All right, anybody else?
I mean, definitely she's going to be covered. I don't know the process exactly, but I mean, I know if a member of the church gets hurt, I mean, they just, when they go to the hospital, they give the insurance information that we have to the hospital, and they bill the insurance directly. But in this case, she's not a member, but there's got to be a form that she can fill out, because insurance does cover her, anyone on the property.
Well, insurance should cover her. They're not saying they won't cover her. They're just telling her to pay out of pocket, and they'll reimburse her. I do believe that in a situation like that, you can go back to the insurance company and say to them, well, listen, she doesn't have the money to do this, and ask them to do a direct bill to the insurance company. However, the insurance company is under no obligation to discuss this incident with you, because you are not the person who was injured. So in a situation like this, it's easy to go to your conference insurance person and say she can't afford this. Tell the insurance company they need to pay these bills directly, not have her reimbursed, because if she has to get reimbursed and she doesn't go, then inform them that her situation could worsen, and if it worsens, then ultimately we could be sued for not having done all that we could to mitigate the loss and to take care of her injury. And so in this instance, the insurance company did agree, right? However, it took them so long to agree that this was going on for months. The woman was walking around still injured, needing therapy, couldn't get therapy. And so finally, right, I did advise her. I said, get an injury and liability attorney. Now keep in mind that the injury and liability attorney doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to sue the church. But what it does mean is that sometimes a person may need an advocate who can speak to the insurance company on their behalf. Because she kept saying to me, why don't you just talk to them for me? So I tried to call them. They wouldn't talk to me because I'm not the one who was injured, But however, they will listen to the attorney who's representing his or her client. So sometimes having the attorney is helpful. And keep in mind, when we talk about someone actually suing the church, sometimes it usually doesn't come to a lawsuit. More than likely, on most instances, they come to an agreement upon some sort of settlement as to what ought to be done and what's the best way to handle it. Now, I'll give you another example of something that happened similar to this. Horrible example, absolutely horrible example. A man was at camp meeting, and he was going down some concrete stairs. The concrete stairs did not have a railing, and these concrete stairs were in the field that led from one hill down to another hill where a tent was. No railing. The man tripped, fell, hit his head, right? They took him to the hospital. He's in the hospital, and I go and see him in the hospital from the campground. I go up there and I visit him, and I see him. He's one of my members. That was the last time. The last time he talked to me was the last time he talked. His brain swelled. He went into a coma. He did not wake up for months. And on top of that, the insurance company was saying that he ought to be better by now, and he shouldn't pay, and all. And they were going back and forth on this thing. And his wife wife was saying, I'm out of money, I don't know what I'm going to do. I said, you better get yourself an attorney. Get yourself an attorney and go talk to those people. Especially since in the whole situation, the man fell at the campground. Don't you know nobody from the conference office called to check on that man? Most of the time, you can ward off a lawsuit by showing compassion at the time of the injury. Doctors will tell you that the ones who get sued are the ones who don't have good bedside manner, right? If you show compassion for your patient, even if you made a mistake and you go to them and say, listen, we tried this, it didn't work, we're going to do this again. They say, well, I like my doctor, I'm not going to sue my doctor. But if you show callousness in the middle of the situation, just sit down and wait for the lawsuit because it's going to come. It's going to come. Not only did they not check on the man, but they never fixed the steps. The steps they called the man to fall. I went back to the campground 2 years later, and the steps were still there, still with no railing. And here, a man fell and hit his head. The man ended up dying, and the steps are still there with no railing. You know, so sometimes, you know, administrators flub like that. And so at the end of the day, you know, the family felt as though they had no other recourse but to sue. They finally settled out of court for a sum, but it was a shame that it got to that point. That case is so illustrative of several things. The negligence on the part of the campground, first of all, to make sure that those steps were in compliance. The steps were not in compliance with code. The steps were uneven, and there were no rails. Secondly, the conference continued its negligence by not removing those steps or placing signs and notice on those steps for people not to use those steps and roping them off. So people still continue to use the steps after it was known to have been a hazard. The third thing that they did is they showed negligence by not ensuring that the insurance company was notified immediately and that the claim was filed and assisting the claimant with the claim. That's negligence. It happened on your property. Make sure that you're taking care of the people, right? And so at the end of the day, you know, they could have sued the conference for tens of millions of dollars, but they settled out of court for something else. Now, I want to move on to just another area that is really important that we talk about too. And but this is the area of safety, right? Personal safety and security in your church. Security in your church. Here we go. I'm gonna hit this one for you.
We're going to start with a pair of violent attacks on religious gatherings over the weekend that have shaken other communities of faith across the nation. 2 people were shot and killed at a Sunday morning church service near Fort Worth, Texas, only 14 hours after an intruder stabbed 5 people at a Hanukkah celebration north of New York City.
A live stream video captured yesterday's shooting at the West Freeway Church of Christ in White Settlement, Texas. An armed parishioner quickly shot and killed the attacker. The man who responded is credited for saving many lives. Maria Villarreal is at the church about 10 miles west of Fort Worth. Maria, what do we know at this hour?
Well, you know, right now, the investigators are praising the heroic action of parishioners who helped stop this gunman. In fact, several people actually jumped up when the shots rang out, pulled out their guns to try and protect the congregation. We did speak with one woman who was sitting with her family just a few feet away from this gunman with her 7-year-old daughter. And she says almost immediately when this guy walked in, she got a bad vibe.
It was like a matter of seconds.
That's how long it took to turn a peaceful Sunday service into a room filled with chaos and fear.
Cameras inside this sanctuary capture the moment the gunman pulled a shotgun from his pants, shooting 2 male parishioners in the corner of the church. Some ran to escape the danger while others hid under pews. Isabel Ariola and her family noticed the man sitting toward the back of the church.
I don't feel comfortable. I said he just, is giving me a bad vibe.
She was within feet of the gunman when he started shooting.
I told my husband, let's go and give me my baby. And I just said, I gotta get her out of here.
The gunman was killed by a parishioner who's part of a volunteer security team. Several more members drew their guns as well. There were more than 240 people inside at the time.
This team responded quickly, and within 6 seconds, the shooting was over.
Church members identified the two men who were killed as Richard White and Tony Wallace.
We lost 2 great men today. But it could have been a lot worse.
This has been Ariola's church for more than 15 years, and she says she has no plans to stay away.
We have to pray that we can get back. I have to, thank God that I'm alive.
The FBI is working with local and state law enforcement. Right now, they are not releasing the name of the suspect, and they are still working on the motive. But we do know that he has ties to this community, and he has a criminal past. The congregation is planning to meet tonight to finish the Sunday service that was interrupted yesterday. Adriana?
Yeah, thank you. It's so important to be together right now.
We begin this hour with the breaking news out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This is where police SWAT teams have swarmed an area around the Tree of Life Synagogue. This is a temple where there were reports of an active shooter, also reports of numerous fatalities. Police telling people in the area to stay in their homes and shelter in place. Police are now reporting they have a suspect in custody. We are tracking the very latest for you right here on CBC News Network, and we begin our coverage with the CBC Stephen D'Souza. He is watching from New York as all of this unfolds. So what have you been able to find out so far, Steve?
Well, this is a situation that developed just a couple of hours ago, and it's an ongoing situation, so you'll have to bear with us as we provide information that's as up to date as possible. But it appears that the congregation was gathering just after 9:45 this morning. A suspect burst in and began firing, and there could be as many as up to 60 people among 3 different groups that were at the synagogue this morning. Of course, being Sabbath today, this is the day that the Jewish community would be gathering at the synagogue, and we know now the situation has stabilized somewhat. The suspect did surrender himself to police, but in terms of the damage and the carnage that was left behind, still getting conflicting reports as to the numbers there. We did hear briefly from officials on the scene. Let's take a quick listen to what they had to say.
Well,
We begin this out.
well, you get the picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we are now living in an environment where we have a number of different scenarios that can happen at any given period of time. So when we talk about risk management and safety, you also have to talk about security and what security looks like in the age in which we live. Let's see if I can pull this up for you real quick. So, question, should you implement a security team? That's a big question, right? That's a huge question. A lot of churches are trying to grapple with that right now because there's been so many church shootings. You all remember what happened in South Carolina at the church there where Dylan Roof went in, where people were actually having Bible study. And they sat there and they had Bible study with the man, and then he opened fire and killed 16 people at the Bible study. You know? Have you ever been in a scenario like that in your church where you just felt uncomfortable, or when something happened that could have been prevented had there been a response team? Have you ever been there? Anybody have an experience like that? I got experience with everything, so I can tell you. I had experience one day where I better told you this one. A woman came to church with a gun to kill me, right? And she actually had the gun. And this was her third attempt at trying to kill me. The first time, her boyfriend saw her on my street and stopped her. She was gonna ring my doorbell and just shoot me. The second time, he had taken the gun from her, had hidden the gun, and she found the gun one Sabbath morning, and she got the gun, and he caught her and took it from her. She was coming to kill me. But then the third time, she actually had gotten the gun, had left the church, and he called me while she was on her way to the church, saying she's coming to church to kill you. Now, I don't know. I was dumb back then, because I'm thinking, well, I don't want to disrupt the church. I don't want to disrupt the members of the church. I don't want people to be scared. I don't want the police out here and all the newscasters to show up in front of my church. So I'm just going to pray that she doesn't show up. So I'm praying she doesn't show up. And I'm in church now, and what does she do? She shows up. She comes in, she sits down in the middle section of the church, directly in front of the pulpit, a few pews back. And I'm preaching, and she reaches into her purse and puts her hand in, and she pulls her hand out, and I see the butt of a gun. Right? So I just start preaching harder. You know, I'm preaching, I'm whipping up a storm now. And then, you know, she starts looking, and the gun goes back in. And then it comes back out, and it goes back in. This goes on for about 2 or 3 times until finally, you know, I got to the appeal, and I'm just praying to the Lord. The congregation doesn't know what's happening. I'm the only one who knows. And finally I got to the appeal, and I'm praying, and I make this tremendous appeal, and she got up and she ran outside the door of the church. But I want to ask you a question. What should I have done? What should I have done in that scenario? Was that the wisest move that I could make?
I think you're very brave, Dr. Blue. I don't know what I would have done.
Yeah, I think I'm a little foolish. Yeah, but
Yeah.
Well, what would you have done, Daniel?
I would have preached. I mean, Lord, where's my faith at? But I mean, she's trying to kill me 3 times, Pastor Dr. Blue. I mean, I am not going to preach. I'm going to call my first elder if he can preach for me.
Daniel, ¿cuál es la pregunta?
Él está a él lo quisieron matar y fue una mujer con una pistola a matarlo. Él pregunta qué tú harías en esa situación si alguien te va a matar. ¿Predicas o no predicas?
Oh, eso está duro.
Jonathan said it's difficult.
Hay que orar.
He said a lot of prayer.
Está duro eso.
A lot of prayer. Let me ask you a question. As the person in charge, what should be your first thought? What's your first responsibility?
Safety of the congregation.
Protect the church. Yes.
The safety of the congregation.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
First obligation, no question. When I say I was foolish, I was foolish. That had to be about 30 years ago. I would never do that now. Never. Ever. Never. I was foolish. I was thinking, oh, God will protect me. Didn't he protect Daniel in the lion's den and the Hebrew boys in the fiery furnace? But you know, Daniel was thrown in the den. The Hebrew boys were thrown in the fiery furnace. Here was a situation that was completely and totally preventable. I should have, when he called me, I should have picked up the phone, called 911, told them that there was an active threat. Someone was planning to come to church carrying a weapon, told them who the person was, and wait for the police to arrive. Because in not doing so, I placed everybody in that church in jeopardy. Everybody. Now, praise God, it turned out okay, because the Spirit covers for our infirmities and for our stupidity. Yeah, thank God for the Holy Spirit. But it shouldn't have been that way, right? So we don't know, given the age in which we live, the mental stability or lack thereof of individuals, And in a highly polarized kind of country in which we live right now, we never know when something is going to jump off.
Dr. Lou, can you tell us why she wanted you dead so bad?
Yes. Yeah, I can tell you exactly why. Right? It goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It was an instance of child abuse.
Oh,
It was a child abuse instance. And her daughter had been taken away from her because of child abuse. She wanted me to go to, I went with her to court, stood beside her in court, as just as a moral support. The judge mandated her to get counseling. He told the judge that she wanted me to do the counseling. And the judge said he is not a licensed counselor, but I will assign you a counselor. He assigned her to a counselor who happened to be white. She said she couldn't deal with a white counselor, and that I should go back there and demand that they allow me to be the counselor. And I said, I can't do that. I won't do that. You just need to go ahead and follow through on what the court has told you need to do. In the meantime, her daughter was out of the home. And so rather than her accepting the responsibility that she had, first of all, caused the problem, and then secondly, she wasn't doing what she needed to do to ameliorate the problem and get the daughter back, she displaced the anger and put it on me. And therefore, I was the one who was to blame for all of that, so she determined that I must die. Right? So obviously, it's a case of mental instability here, right?
Yeah.
She got wrapped too tight. But it doesn't matter whether she's wrapped too tight or not, she still want to kill me.
Yeah.
Right? So she's trying to get me to kill me. So that's why she wanted to kill me. Right? Sometimes when I tell a story, people say, oh man, you must have been having a relationship with her. No, I wasn't having a relationship with her. She was trying to kill me over her child. So, but in a situation like that, when a person is unstable or unbalanced, clearly they're in danger to themselves or another. I did act appropriately earlier, right? When I said I cannot undo what the court has said. As a court mandated person, then I must follow what the court dictates in regards to the law. I did follow what I should have done there. But in this instance, I did not do what I should have done, which is pick up a phone and call 911, right? To stop the risk. Are you seeing my screen now? Are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Are you guys seeing my screen? It says,
Yes.
all right, church security, okay. All right. Where are we now? You should consider beginning a church security ministry or updating procedures that you now have in place, right? As your church reaches the level of due diligence required by law, what your church doesn't know or chooses to ignore can cause serious liability for your church. Some steps you got to take here. First of all, evaluate your current situation, right? Proposing a safety security team to the church board, right? Selecting security team members, training the team, and implementation of the team. Now, I think it's critically important, especially for churches in high crime areas or in urban areas, to make sure that you have a safety and security team and that team is trained for many different reasons, not just the active shooter. And although the active shooter is real, that is the most extreme case that you can find. In our conference, we actually have active shooter training, and they provide the active shooter training for our congregations. They do it for the risk managers and others. They do a big seminar yearly. If you want specialized training, there are people who will come specifically to your church to work out a security protocol for you. In my congregation, I made my elders and my deacons and my risk management team go through that training. Right? They didn't follow through like I wanted them to, but at least I made them go through the training. In my church, I do have right now on Saturday morning, my security team, they have walkie-talkies. They can talk to each other back and forth inside the congregation, so that if something occurs, they can communicate quickly with each other. they have protocols that are set up for evacuating the congregation in the event of a major disaster, a fire, or in the event of an active shooter. They have protocols that are set up for that. When the offering is taken, there are protocols that are set up for when the offering is taken, so that there are certain doors that are locked. Outside doors are locked. No one leaves or enters the sanctuary when offering is being taken, and the team takes that offering through certain passageways to the treasury room to a secure location, because we understand that there have been instances where churches have been robbed during the offering time. They keep an eye, for example, when people come in who seem like they don't belong. You remember what in the video we were just watching in Texas, the woman said she looked at him and he just didn't look like he belonged there. He just seemed strange. And so she made a determination, and I need to get up and move away from him. And thank God she did, because one of those bullets could have had her name on it, right? So training people to be attentive to what goes on. Now, we never want to get to the place where we are just mistreating people because they're not dressed nicely or because they seem like they're a little different than who we are. But you got to have your antenna up, right? You got to do this for the sake of protecting others. And so not everybody is good at this. That's why you have to select a team and train the team, right? And let them work out protocols, right? And those protocols should be presented to the board, by the way, so that other people know what those protocols are, and they should be voted by the board as well, because when they are voted by the board, they become part of your policy. Risk management will want to know what procedures you had in place. If something happens, the attorney of those who were injured will want to know what steps did the church take. There's something that's called foreseeable negligence. That means that you could have seen a problem and you didn't prevent it, therefore you're liable. Let me ask you this question. We don't have much time. Let me ask you this question. Do you think, we're almost out of time, do you think that churches should have armed security? You notice what happened in Texas, right? Right? Or wherever that shooting was, right? It said within 6 seconds it was over because members whipped out their guns and took them down, right? Do you think that churches should have armed security?
I think if they do, they have to be really trained. If I'm not mistaken, that gentleman that killed that active shooter was actually an ex-police officer, so he had prior training. The issue that I see, because we talked about this a lot in our church, is that we have an ex-police officer in our church. He was actually 9/11 when the towers came down, and he's in our church now. And we talk about this, and the issue that we see is that we're for it, but we don't want just anyone to carry a gun. Even though in the state of Florida, you get a permit and you can carry a weapon legally. But the problem is, in a situation like this, you can end up killing the wrong person, and it can happen. So that's the only concern that we have. Our first elder, who is the ex-police officer, he's armed, and the church knows it, the board knows it, and he's allowed to have the gun in the church because of his prior experience. We know that he's not just going to go crazy shooting people. He's going to, if the threat comes, he knows what to do. So we think that if there's proper training and the people follow up with the training, and we know that we can be satisfied that the person's going to be able to handle that weapon properly, then we have no problem doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Well, I will say this. The one thing that risk management will want to know, that if you have an armed security personnel in your team, on your team and in your church, armed security, they want to know that, because there are risks that are associated with that. And you're absolutely right. It's possible that the wrong person could be targeted and shot. It's possible for someone to get inadvertently caught in the crossfire. So generally speaking, they advise against it. However, they also know that in different parts of the United States, people are allowed to have concealed carry. Like in Alabama, you can have concealed carry. You know, you can come to church packing if you want to, underneath your coat. Nobody even knows that you have a weapon, right? Same thing in Florida and many other parts of the country. So they know that they can't necessarily keep all the guns outside the church. However, if somebody's going to be acting in an official capacity, you should let risk management know that. And if they say, well, we won't cover that, then those persons, if they take that upon themselves, they would have to know that that's a risk that they are taking upon themselves. Because if someone actually is killed in the process, they could be prosecuted. They could go to jail, right? Even if they were acting in what they considered to be the best interest of the church, right? Someone is dead, there's going to be an investigation. And there could be legal costs and all the rest of it they have to bear. There was an incident that happened. It wasn't a church incident, but this was something that happened in my neighborhood, not too far from where I live. The guy came to the 7-Eleven, and he decided he was going to steal a soft drink and some cakes or something out of 7-Eleven, right? So he does this, and the guy behind the counter, right, sees him, tells him to stop. But the guy doesn't stop. He walks out the store with this soft drink and a couple of cakes. The guy from the counter is irate. He jumps across the counter, has a box cutter, and starts chasing the guy down the street, right? He catches the guy, a fight ensues. He stabs the guy with the box cutter, and the guy dies. Now, you know, he may have thought at that moment that he was acting appropriately. He was stopping the commission of a crime in his mind. But because he wasn't trained and knew what he was doing, he ended up killing somebody. Now, right, he is arrested and in jail for a second-degree manslaughter. See? And because somebody died. He didn't intend for that person to die, but they died. So you got to be careful and taking these kinds of steps. But I believe that I've got this presentation in there for you somewhere. So you want to investigate the feasibility and the liability versus the liability of doing nothing. Like, for example, if you are in an area that's high crime, you know, you may want to consider that versus doing nothing, right? But you got to do due diligence because you can be prosecuted, right? And here are some of the challenges that you find. You got diverse organizations. Churches are not security conscious. Those who are, they don't share what they should know. Some churches are image conscious, so they don't want to make it appear as though they have a problem, right? So churches are poor, so money is a problem to do this, right? And security in the church is not viewed as the same way as security in schools or malls, right? Cops don't view it that way, right? So you got to take all those things into consideration. So tonight, what I just wanted to do was to introduce you to some of the challenges that you will find in dealing with risk management, safety, and security. You ought to give these things due consideration as a church administrator. Regardless of the size of your church, take all these things into consideration. Whether or not your building is up to code, whether or not you have proper reporting systems in place to deal with issues of abuse and child abuse, to make sure that you are aware of your risk associated with crime and other sort of violent activities, to make sure that your building is properly insured up to the assessed amount, and that they give you a poor assessment, go out and get another assessment of your building and your property to make sure you have maximum coverage. Then make sure and certain that short-term trips and other sort of special activities that you get special insurance just to cover those incidences and events. You want to make sure that your board votes your programs and activities. And one thing I do at my church every month when we have a board meeting, I want to know every activity that's going, and we vote it. We vote the calendar. We vote the calendar. That means that when we vote the calendar, if something should occur, it is in our minutes that these were official programs and events of the church. So if something happens, risk management can go back and say, okay, we see that this was official. This wasn't just a group of members who got together on a boat on a Sunday afternoon. No, this was an official church program, therefore we cover it by insurance. So I want you to think in those terms as a church administrator to protect yourself from and your congregation from liability. All right, any questions for the old man? Well, all right, well, listen, I want to thank you all very much. Jonathan was asking, he says, well, how long are we going to continue on with these classes? Well, like I said before, this, these things that I'm sharing with you are not anything that you have to do, but I'm just giving it to you because I think that you might find it useful. That's all. If you're going to be thinking about church administration. And the one thing that gives administrators headaches at night is not that they didn't have a strategic plan. It's the stuff that you didn't plan for. It just springs up on you. And all of a sudden you wake up and it's on your lap. And you wake up and you get a phone call from an attorney who says, hey man, you're being sued. Or the roof just collapsed on your building, and there were, two people inside and one of them is injured, That's the kind of stuff that drives administrators crazy. So it's talking about this kind of stuff. Now I do have some more case studies that I could share with you next week if you want to. These are case studies that look at different kinds of situations and scenarios that as an administrator, it might be the kinds of things that you would end up having to deal with at some time. So if you want to do that, I'll be here. If not, that's fine.
I think the group is getting smaller and smaller, Dr. Blue.
Yes, it is. I see that.
Yeah.
I see that.
I had my wife, and actually when she hit record, because I taught her how to log me in, it was just you there and myself, just us two. Because she called me, I was working, and and I made an agreement with my boss the first 8 weeks, but after that, like, I really don't want to push it because he needs me, So I said, well, I'm recording every class, so I just go back and watch whatever I missed.
I understand. I do understand.
I go either way. I mean, if I can make it to the class, but I just don't want to, commit and say yes, I'll be here, and then you wait for me and I'm not. I think I have your class packed down pretty good. You're a good professor. You explain things well. I got a few more things that I have to do and do my final work, but I think I understand.
Okay, since I mean, what I'm hearing from you is, I think what I'm sensing is a sentiment that there's no like overwhelming pressing need to say, oh, Pastor Blue, I got to be here next week. I don't quite hear that. So
no, I enjoy your class. I really do.
Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll send you all out an email to remind you, because we will have a final class session, right? Now, final class session, I'm going to be expecting you all to be sharing with us in a brief presentation what that project is that you've been working on. Okay? So a brief PowerPoint presentation so you can share with us exactly what project you've been working on, how you assessed it, how you came to decide that this was something that was important and needed to be done, because you looked at some demographics and other things and said, this is what we need to do here, and here's how I would approach it. I want you to take into consideration as you're thinking about your project, not only how does it fit into the strategic plan that you're outlining for it, but also what are some of the legal implications I may run into, right? What approvals do I need to get along the way, either from the church board, from the conference, or maybe from city officials, from municipalities? Maybe I need a government approval for this. I want you to consider those kinds of things and to think as an administrator not as a person who says, oh, I want to do a program, right? Think in terms like you're the one who has to answer all the questions. I got to answer all the questions, and I'm the one who's presenting this to others. So that's your mission, should you desire to accept it. Okay?
So you're gonna send us an email with the final project. Is what you're saying, or I mean?
Yes, with the to remind you
Okay.
of that final class, because I do believe that final, I think it's the first Tuesday in November. Is it the first Tuesday in November? It's supposed to be our final class. I think it is.
Let me see.
Well, we can't do it on Tuesday. I know that's right.
November. Is it November the 3rd or November the 10th? I don't remember.
Probably, is it the 10th?
Well, the 3rd is the first Tuesday. Then the 10th, I think.
Well, let's make sure it's going to be on the 10th. It can't be on the 3rd, because the third is election day, and I want to make sure that everybody votes.
Okay.
Please vote.
Yes.
You want to know how you can get an A in my class? Vote. I won't tell you who to vote for, but if you vote for the right person, you can get an A plus. A plus plus plus. Please vote, right? And I know people on different time zones, so polls will be closing at different times across the country. But make sure you do what you got to do to vote. So it'll be the 10th then. The 10th will be that day we come back together for our final session. I'll make sure I send the email out so that everybody will know that. Right?
Okay.
But listen, man, you all are a good group. You're fun. Y'all are interesting people. Yeah, I like y'all a lot. So, and don't, and I'm telling you, man, just don't stress yourself about the grade. Just do the work. Don't stress the grade. Just do the work. The thing is there to help you, not to help me. You're not impressing me. You're not here to impress me. You're here to think about what you are doing and say, how can I do it better? That's what your purpose is. Okay. Right. All right.
So if we have any questions on the final, can we email you?
Yeah, you can email, or you can call me or text me. Texting me is probably better. And I got four emails. So in the middle of my 4 emails,
Mary.
so sometimes I get lost in the sauce, but
Okay.
I will leave my phone numbers out there too, but I can give it to you one more time. The phone number's on the syllabus. But
Is 942-4034?
Yep.
Okay.
It's there, so you can text me and or call me. I'll get back to you.
Okay.
All right.
Thank
Well,
you.
let's have a concluding word of prayer this evening. Our Father in heaven, Lord, we want to thank you very much for the privilege that we have had to spend some time together thinking about the issues related to church administration. We do know that there are certain challenges that we face, particularly in the times in which we live. With safety and security, everybody sees the church as cash cow. They want to sue the church left and forward. However, we have a responsibility as those who have been given guardianship and stewardship to do everything within our power to protect and to preserve those who you have placed under our keeping and care. Give us wisdom, we pray, in regards to this. Now bless each of these students as they continue on with their life's work, I pray, in Jesus' name.
Amen. Good night.
All right.
Thank you.
Peace, love, soul.